So we always start with the same question, really. It's just, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
Okay, so my name's Hannah Bailey, and I am the founder of my own business of Blue Light Wellbeing. I'm a psychotherapist, a trauma therapist, a wellbeing coach. You can call me anything you like, as long as it's polite. You can call me anything you like on this podcast. Um, and I work in trauma, mainly PTSD, but other traumas. You don't have to have some clinical diagnosis of PTSD to come and see me. It just tends to be sort of one of the biggest areas that I work in. And I work mainly with police and ex-police, but I do work across the emergency services. I work with military. And I do work with, I don't really love the word civilians, but I do work with people who aren't in those roles as well. But that's just the majority of the clients that I see. So I also do but training and education in mental health and wellbeing as well. So I do speaking and events and CPD. What else do I do? I do critical incident consultancy work. So after critical incidents, again, mainly in policing. And I also work for homicide support. So I work with the bereaved families of murder and manslaughter cases.
Hannah, that's fascinating, and I imagine also quite harrowing when you're talking about the critical incidents and I guess, the bereavement for murder and manslaughter relations. Do you manage to, I guess, keep a professional arm's length distance, or do you find it that you are often also drawn in?
I think it's a really fine line to draw with every client, because I'm not a robot either. So I think people can see that I am perhaps touched by what's happened to them and care about them and empathise with them. But I know I'm not emotional, if that's probably the word, in a session. Definitely not in a session. I'm not emotional, and wouldn't be. And I think it's important that I'm not, because my space is to hold a safe space for them. So no, I'm not in a session. But I am a human being, so it of course affects me. Yeah, definitely, and some more than others, some days more than others. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but I've been through my own journey with mental health and wellbeing around burnout and PTSD. So I learn how to manage that, to look after myself. I have supervision, so all the things that are in place to ensure that that's not taking its toll in the wrong way.
Thank you.
Going back to the beginning, what did you want to do when you were growing up?
And not this. But you don't get to 47 and do everything that you always wanted to do you, when you're a little girl? So I wanted to be a ballet dancer.
Hey.
So really probably couldn't be sort of much further away from that. I wanted to be a ballet dancer, and I auditioned for the Royal Ballet and I didn't get in. So yeah, I sort of would have gone that route. So goodness knows where that would have taken me. Probably not here. It might have done, actually, if I'd been ballet. I'm sure they have their own, bless them, traumas and some really tough stuff going on there. So maybe I would have done, but I didn't get in and gave it up. And something which I'm sure we'll sort of talk about as well. But I became a police officer. So that was not anything that I'd ever thought of doing. I went to a private girls' school, so it was definitely not on the careers list of things to do, was to be a police officer. It wasn't on my radar at all. Nobody in my family is in the police. And I just fell into it. I knew two guys from the pub that were special constables,
Yeah.
so the volunteer police, and I fell into it. And they said it's really good fun. It's a bit of a lark, and it sounded that, which is, I know, not the right way to talk about it, but I was 19, 20 at the time, so you do talk about it like that. And so I joined, and I absolutely loved it. So I was very lucky. Not all specials have a great experience, I'll be honest, in peace. But I did, and I was really lucky. I was really well supported by the regular officers that I worked alongside, and I loved it. So I thought, right.
Where was that then?
My career, West Midlands.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I joined the regulars at the age of 21.
Wow. So what you do, like, is that, I don't know how it works. You do a couple of years as a special, and then you it's like a sort of an apprenticeship, or how does it work?
You don't have to at all. You can just join the regulars, so you don't have to. Some people do use it as a route to sort of find out more about the job, absolutely. But yeah, it's not a necessity. I think I'd been a special a year, and I applied, and then at the time it took about another year to go through all the different processes that I was accepted and then started. So yeah, so no, you don't have to. And then I joined, full time when I was 21.
So tell us about the police. How long did you do that for?
So I did it for 15 years.
Wow.
And I was on uniform response. So I was based at, I don't know where you guys are from, but I was based in where, sorry?
Bedford.
In Bedford. So it depends sort of what, the area, but West Midlands Police. And I was on sort of a massive council housing estate called Chelmsley Wood. And at the time was the biggest housing estate in Europe, I think. And so it was very varied, the work that we did. Some of it was fantastic communities, and others was very, very challenging work. But it was great, and I absolutely loved it, fell in love with it, definitely was going to be my career for 30 years. So I did uniform response, which is where you're on sort of area cars and you respond to all the emergency calls and some routine calls, but mainly emergency calls that are coming in that shift. So you can go to absolutely anything or everything. And I did learn that you really would go to anything or everything. So from my private girls' school to work in the beat in Chelmsley Wood, it was a big, big life lesson and a big learning curve, but an amazing one, an absolutely amazing one.
You said that you were called out. You would go out every day. It could be anything. Could you tell us any particularly memorable, perhaps amusing or weird incidents? The man with the saucepan stuck on his head, or whatever.
Oh my God, there's so many.
Go. We've got all afternoon. Go on.
Okay, come on, let's have a little thing. I can tell you. Oh my God, there's loads. I can tell you about me trying to chase a burglary suspect, and I went over like the really tall gates down the side of people's alleyways.
Uh-huh.
And officers launched me at this gate, and I got caught on my handcuffs on the belt over the gate. So I'm just literally like a sort of beached whale on the top of this gate. So then I start laughing, which is obviously the wrong thing. The suspect is like down the garden, pissing himself at me because I'm just stuck on the gate. And my colleagues on the other side, they're pissing themselves at me. And we probably did look something like out of a ridiculous sitcom of not remotely professional policing of me. They wouldn't get me down because it was so hilarious and my arse is hanging out over this gate, and the suspect just thought he's just pissing himself as well, and it was just a complete keystone. So,
did he get away?
Yes, he did. Yeah, because it wasn't going to stand around for me to get off to be pushed over the fence by my colleagues who were laughing at me. So, what would you like? Weird and wonderful, or probably a sort of funny one is I can remember being a probationer and we got called to the local AMBO station, and they said over the air, can you attend a confirmed break? And I didn't really know the language properly, and that actually just means a break-in, but no one's there now, like somebody broke in and the next one. And I thought they said a confirmed rape, because I didn't hear it properly and I don't know the language. So I'm all new and thinking, oh my God, we're going to a rape and I'll have to like take the lady's side and be really sensitive and all that. And I did like this. So I'm sort of preparing myself to go in. My colleague, my tutor constable, great guy called Mick, very laid back, very chilled. And when we got to the AMBO station, there was a female there crying, not sobbing, but a bit tearful. And he put his arm around her and he said, come on, pet. He said, dry your tears. Get the kettle on for us, and you can show us where they force their way in. I was just like, oh my God, what kind of job have I joined? Like this? Oh, the rumours. Oh my God. And I was so indignant. I was like, Mick, I couldn't get the words out. I was so cross at him, and I was just fuming. And I had this massive go at him. And he's like looking at me like, she's starting to look at me like this. There was another colleague in there like, look, like, what is this random weird officer saying about how insensitive and how rude. Anyway, he clocked in the end.
Oh my goodness, that might win the best mishearing of all time.
Best mishearing, yeah. And the way, and it also just, you couldn't have scripted what he said.
It's like terrible Benny Hill or something.
No, terrible, yeah. No. Then after about 6 years, I moved into local CID. So I worked CID in Chelmsley and across another station in Solihull. And then in 2010, we moved to something called 4CID. So that's, I was based at Coventry, but you can cover any major crime that comes in across the force. So murder and manslaughter jobs, people trafficking, stabbings, rape. I was specially trained as a rape and sexual violence investigator.
Gosh.
So that was something that took a lot of work on doing. So I was there for about 15 years. But I became unwell. I think that's sort of, how I've moved into what I do now, and just suffered burnout, and then PTSD, and then cancer. So I got cancer.
Goodness.
So I had a pretty hideous time.
It come in threes.
Yeah, exactly. It really did. In fact, actually, sadly, it came in fours because I went through all the cancer treatment and then it came back a year later. So it was very, very poorly for a good couple of years.
And Hannah, in your mind, do you think that the stresses of the job combined to contribute towards the physical illness?
Yeah, 100%. And something I massively talk about, Andy, when I do training and education, because I think we're getting better, aren't we, at knowing that your mental, emotional and spiritual health affect your physical and vice versa. So they're all intrinsically linked, 100%. But something I really specifically talk about is that if you looked at me physically, I was very well. I was fine. I mean, I was 34. Everyone told me I was too young to have cancer, which is also just rubbish. And we all know that as well, don't we? But they said I was too young to have cancer. But I was, I wasn't overweight. I didn't smoke. I didn't have high blood pressure or high cholesterol. Probably didn't eat very well. I mean, shift work and policing and stuff like that. So probably didn't look after myself like that. But I exercised and all the things that if you had a little tick box on the sheet, I was absolutely fine and very healthy and well. But mentally and emotionally, I was just on my knees. And, was not, I thought I was coping, but was not coping in any way at all. And 100%, because I think people think cancer is a physical disease and a lump or a tumour to get rid of. But actually, you're just really, really sick. And I was really, really sick. Part of me getting better had to be all those things, not just getting rid of a lump sort of thing. So.
Yeah.
And did you find is that sort of a catalyst almost into moving into psychotherapy? Or did it inform your approach to setting up Blue Light?
Yeah, a bit of both. I mentioned that my cancer came back. So I'd been through chemo and surgery and been off sick from work for a while. And I went back to work and really, Andy, just tried to get on with my life and pretend sort of really that had happened. Isn't that awful? Let's just crack on. And that is I think that's a very police officery thing as well. Like, I've got through this is rubbish, but just actually sort of put your big girl pants on, if you're allowed to say that anymore, and crack on and get on with it. And that's really how I tried to deal with it. And that didn't work. And very quickly I was unwell again. And as I said, my cancer came back. So I think what I realised is it was not just a wake-up call, but I kept saying to people, why am I so sick? Why am I so ill, to my doctors and stuff like that? They just said, oh, it's just bad luck. And it's not bad luck. You're ill. You're really unwell. And nobody wanted to help me with that side of things. We're talking about 2012, and it just wasn't spoken about. Still, that was only 12 years ago. It wasn't talked about like that at all. And I was also told that I had a very rare form of cancer the second time, called triple negative breast cancer. And at the time, the prognosis of that is very, very poor. My 5-year prognosis was very poor. And I was told that to have chemo, it would probably be about an 8% chance of chemo working on my type of cancer. So it was really very frightening, very dark. And I kept saying, there must be something else. No, there was nothing else. It was this or nothing. So I decided I wasn't going to do that as well, and thought I've just got to get better on a whole level, every level. And so I started to research what that meant, what it meant to be well, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and embarked on a bit of a journey there. And I ended up going to Germany for treatment. I had my cancer treatment in Germany. I didn't have chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and I changed everything that was important, that I hadn't considered was important before. So I changed, my mindset, my approach, my self-care. I started, sort of healing from trauma and therapy for that. That's when I decided to leave the job, because I really just felt it was actually sort of literally killing me, I think.
Gosh.
It's probably going to do me in. So, and wow. I knew at the time as well, guys, that there wasn't the mental and emotional support if I went back. Hopefully more so now today there might be, but it was not at the time. So it was time to go. So
goodness.
Yeah. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, Andy, to your question, but it did absolutely form my reasons for leaving the police. Yeah, probably fairly clear. But then really what it formed is that there are many, many ways for us to heal. And actually, as a police officer, Andy, I'm not doing pink and fluffy, or I'm not doing anything alternative, or I don't do meditation, or I don't do whatever it is, and really shut those doors. And it humbled me, is probably a better word. And it humbled me to get off my ego and my high horse to what you do or don't do to be well, or anything in life, by the way, whatever you want to get. And actually start learning and opening your mind and opening those doors and seeing what's there. And if they're not for you, and some of the things on that journey weren't for me and they didn't resonate, and that's fine, don't use them. But there are many, many ways for us to take a path in life and get where we want. And it was time to look at all the different ways I could do that.
So I'm intrigued. So give us a for instance. So you said some of the approaches worked for you and some of them didn't. What did you find to be particularly helpful with regard to sort of overall wellness and I guess mindset?
So I learnt very much to challenge my thoughts. And that might sound ever so simple, but actually what I realised is that we run a programme of thoughts in our heads all the time, every day, of what we just believe, the culture we're in, how we're brought up, religion, politics, policing, you run a narrative all the time in your head. And actually when you start stopping and questioning that narrative, and actually wondering if there could be a different narrative. And there might not be. Maybe you'll stick with the original narrative, but there might not be. So it's really helped me stop and consider other people's point of view, other people's learning, other people's wisdom, other people's education, and running or working with what fits right for me. And I didn't have that before. I was probably quite judgmental, being honest. I mean, I don't know many police officers probably aren't, if we're really honest. And you have to be a bit in the job. You have to form judgments and snap judgments. But it was time to just kind of look at some of those and change some of those. Yeah. So that was something very resonant for me. But there was stuff that wasn't.
Can we talk a little bit about the police and that sort of being sort of tough in the force? It's not the force anymore, is it? It's the service or something.
Service or force, yeah, whichever you like.
Well, sometimes just being in the police within that organisation a little bit tough.
Yes, I did experience it, but I'm saddened to hear the narrative of it now, as if that's the only way policing is. Because I don't believe that. And also remember, obviously, I work with them most days. So I don't believe it's a failing and thuggish and discriminatory service as a whole. I don't. And I don't It's not what I see in my work, and it's not what I saw for 15 years. Did I see problems? Yeah. 100%. I was victim of a sexual harassment in the job from another officer. But I reported that, and I was listened to, and it was dealt with. So I didn't. So yes, I did experience it, but not in the way of it being ignored or shunned, or I was a troublemaker or anything like that at all. So in that sense, it was, as you would with any organisation, it's going to happen. But for me, it was dealt with correctly, and I was supported. So I didn't have a bad experience in that sense.
Yeah. That must be the vast majority of officers' experience, isn't it? When you see these high profile media cases of things, that have gone very wrong, they must say, well, that doesn't apply to my police station or whatever in Somerset or Middlesbrough or wherever you are.
Yeah, and I suppose the honest answer is I couldn't tell you how rife it is or isn't, but I can say that I worked across the force in different departments and different roles for 15 years and only significantly experienced that once. So that's my experience, yeah.
And you might have experienced that in any sector.
Yeah, I don't probably know an organisation that possibly doesn't have.
So, final question about the police. Did it sort of change? Did you witness a change apart from the sort of massive cuts? and did you witness a sort of change in culture or anything over that time?
Yeah, and actually you say apart from the massive cuts, but actually that's where, and I think any officer that was in before 2010 would agree, that is where the police service changed. And I still think to this day, we are feeling the ripple effects of that. Because we had the austerity measures and every single force was affected. But what started to creep in as the ripple effects was the drop in morale was probably overnight, really, almost with that. Because suddenly when you're being told that there was a team of 15 of you, but actually now 7 of you can do it, but could you do it with the same service and the same commitment and the same dedication? But we'll just pile 100 more jobs on you. You start to drop in morale. But you also start to, the therapy phrase I would say for it is moral injury. Moral injury is probably the biggest thing that affected me and affects officers that come to see me. I think a lot of people think it's the trauma we experience and deal with. And of course, that has an effect. I'm not saying it doesn't, but the moral injury side. So feeling that you are not at all of interest to your organisation in terms of your value, your skills, your experience, your passion. Yes, the cuts, but that means less officers, more overwhelming work, less experience, because they got rid of a lot of experienced officers through the austerity measures. Lack of value in the work you're doing, because therefore you're unable to put in what you would like to put into these jobs that require an awful lot of passion and dedication and blood, sweat and tears. And you can't do that with all the work that we had to do. So you start to lose value in yourself. You start to lose value of how you are valued by others. And you start to feel very isolated in an incredibly difficult job. Yeah. So yes, that did change.
I guess there's no money either for things like emotional support and counselling and stuff like that, right?
If you ask the chief officer, they would say there is. Right. Yes. But I guess here's my thing, guys. I'm private, so people come and pay me privately. I'm not attached to any force. And I'm inundated with work. I'm not trying to be, but I am. I've got a 3-month waiting list, and they should have this free through their service, through their force. And they do. They either don't, or they don't have the correct support that they need. So I'm evidence that there isn't the support for them, because officers shouldn't need to come and pay and see me.
You mentioned that you ended up with PTSD when you were in the police. Was there a particular incident? Please don't talk about it if you don't want to. Was there a particular incident in the police force that you felt pushed you to that state, or was it a build-up, a sort of a drip feed of over time?
It was a drip feed. Actually, after the austerity measures, because it changed so much at work, that I didn't settle on my new team. I didn't enjoy the work so much. I think, again, because there were so many changes, you just didn't really feel like you got anywhere. And as I said, whilst I dealt with a whole variety of crimes, I dealt with a lot of rape and sexual assault, and they were very, very intensive. Very, you can say don't get involved, but that's hard when you're dealing with victims for sort of 18 months and staying with them till, if you get to court, staying with them till court or not going to court. And that's another trauma for them to work through. So it was incredibly, incredibly intensive, without any break, without any support, and often without any result. Talking about that value, like wanting to be of value. And I was doing this because I wanted to make a difference. It sounds so cliche, but I don't think you can do a job like that and not want to make a difference. So, and, feeling like I'm literally putting every ounce I've got into this and not making a difference is quite soul destroying. So when I had therapy, there was definitely some jobs that were more significant for me, 100%. I've been to a little boy who died in a house fire, and that was very, very traumatic for all of us who were there. So there was definitely jobs that I'd had a job with a rape victim that I'd been with for sort of a good 8 months, and her case got dropped at court, which doesn't, to anybody else, that doesn't almost sound that traumatic, but it was just, it was so against the course of justice, if that's probably the words to say. I guess coming back to that moral injury again, feeling like I was constantly working at something that didn't align in the end with what I wanted to be a part of. So there was definitely jobs, that stood out, that was very difficult. It's usually child jobs, I'd say, for police officers that are going to get you, if a job's going to get you. And that was the case definitely for me. But otherwise, really, I think it was a drip, but a build-up, yes.
Do you think there is almost a finite amount of years that some jobs can be, carried through? We talked to one of our first podcasts was with a primary school headmistress. She said she knew from the off that she said it had a certain shelf life, and it's so high pressure that you just wouldn't be able to keep it up. Do you think that's
Yeah, I do. And actually, it's interesting, if I do look at police officers that cope well and don't, as to what departments they're in as well. So it's not just policing, but perhaps where you work. So my husband's in the police, and he has got 2 years to do. So he's done 28 years. And I don't mean there hasn't been any stresses or problems, but he isn't ill. But the departments that he worked on were completely different to mine. And I think that can have a massive effect as well. So he, for example, in all the years I was working with rape and sexual assault, he was working on like an OCG unit, so organised criminal gangs, to do with violent burglaries. So I'm not saying they're not traumatic, but he didn't really deal with the victims, he dealt with the gangs. So actually they were putting a lot of work and intelligence and jobs together that were usually very successful, would go to court, would end in a prison sentence, and were very, very sort of rewarding for them. So you can see that has less of an emotional, mental toll on some of the departments that others are working on. So yeah, I think there's a shelf life definitely depending on your unit as well.
I'd never thought of that. I'd never considered that's how some of them do manage to do 20 or 30 years. Is go and work in financial fraud or.
Yeah, so, and I'm not saying, by the way, before anybody's listening to this, saying you don't deal with any stress, because, but so, and also the units that are less scrutinised. So, for example, uniform now are scrutinised. Every time they take a breath, they're scrutinised. Firearms are scrutinised like nothing else. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but there's units like surveillance units. Most people don't even know surveillance units exist, and they're certainly not scrutinised, and their work isn't scrutinised, and because they operate in the shadows. So and kudos to them. I'm not at all taking away what they do, but it isn't the same as dealing with victims being scrutinised. That same high intensity work every day. Please don't think I'm taking away what they do, because they do an incredible job.
Yeah.
But yes, there's different departments that have different elements of stress.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask, and this might be a dumb question, but you work with the emergency services predominantly, yeah.
Yes.
And I think my question was that of course that they have many things in common and they face many of the same stresses and everything. But have you? I don't know if this is overstepping some sort of confidentiality, but have you witnessed any sort of key differences in them and the things that they come to you with and the things that the ways that they deal with it?
I would say that military personnel struggle the most with leaving. I don't mean, again, they don't have trauma in the job. Of course they do, but they struggle more when they leave. And that is because they don't have civilian life like police and NHS. They still live in civilian life, even if they're job pissed would be the phrase, and they spend all time at work. But military tend to live away or on camps or bases, and so they are much more removed from civilian life. So they tend to feel much more lost and isolated and worthless when they come out, and very much struggle to fit into day-to-day life. So I would say that's more. I don't mean that doesn't happen in policing, but that's more pronounced in military. And I would say NHS and police very similar in that they feel that they're not able to do the job that they joined to do a lot of the time. Now.
Yeah.
Yes. So they struggle, with. I know that sounds silly to say resources, but they struggle to do the job they joined to do.
It is increasingly clear, isn't it, especially from what you've been saying, that all the changes, the financial changes to the economy, are having this huge impact on people. I mean, it's not crassly obvious, but
but it does. It does.
When you put it in those terms, it's really quite apparent.
Interesting, because everyone goes on about the trauma that paramedics or police see. We think it's that, and what's bizarre is most paramedics and police would actually just like to go and do that job. They want to go and do that job. They want to go and do it well and do the best they can, and be there and turn up and help. And actually, it's when they can't, and that's taken away from them. Often, I'm going to be blunt, from the mental health crisis. They can't do their job because, I don't like the word babysitting, but they're babysitting a lot of mental health type jobs that they shouldn't be dealing with. So they're struggling with actually doing the job that they would.
And Hannah, has that been your experience then, or is that anecdotally that's what you think is out there, which is that because of the lack of resources around mental health, that the sort of knock-on effect is that all of that care is effectively transferred over to the police and the services who have to sort of cope with it in real time?
Yes, very much so, yeah. And it's not, nobody is saying it's not important. No one's saying that. They're just saying that's not what police officers came to do. That's not the job they want to do. And even paramedics, to be fair, I know they might go out to a high-risk mental health patient, but ultimately they didn't sign up for that. They signed up for emergency medicine across the board, and police served up to protect communities and fight crime, and that's not really what they're doing a lot of the time. And I would say, I probably went to about 6 suicides a year, sometimes in policing. I would say they're going to about 6 suicides a month.
Ooh.
It's just completely and utterly different. And that's suicide. So they often go to attempts or people about to, so crisis intervention, and then they go with them to hospitals and sit there for 9 hours waiting for triage. So I'm not just talking about suicides, but obviously that's a massive effect as well on them. But yes, mental health is a huge, huge problem, and no one really knows who should deal with it, who should be picking that up.
Yeah. Goodness me. You're sorry, Bells, were you about to say something?
No, it was one of those areas which is I think probably not covered as extensively as it should be in the media. So to hear it firsthand is quite shocking.
Do you think it's sort of coming to a head? Do you think things, it feels like everything's sort of straining under the pressure? I wonder what will happen when the floodgates burst. I wonder what form that will take.
A lot of police forces and police chiefs are signing up forgive me for not having the right title, but something like right person, right time, as in police aren't really the right people that should be turning up to deal with this. And that this should be a medical or NHS place of support. And so they are signing up to that and basically starting to say, we're not going to deal with this all the time. But I also get, you can't just stop it overnight. You can't just leave people and say, well, tough, we'll just hand it to the NHS, who are also on their knees, bless them. So yes, you're right, Martin, it's coming to a head, definitely. And there's clashes and there's agreements. I think the NHS agree they should probably be the people to work with this, but haven't got the funding either.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's in agreement, but no one actually has the solution, I would say, at the moment.
The people being affected the people with mental health problems are just pushed from sort of one service to another, aren't they?
Yeah.
It seems like.
It is, and that's how they feel. And I get they feel that on the end of it as well, which isn't great for them, is it, at all? 100%.
On your website, you've got the sort of main things or the common things that you treat. Is that the right word, the right verb?
I don't think I'm allowed to say treat, actually.
Treat,
but
yes.
I
was aware that wasn't the right word.
Yeah.
That you work with, thank you. Do you see any sort of trends? Are there some more than others? Some are becoming more common, or do you know what I mean? Is there anything you can observe, or is it very broad?
It is broad. I think because of the nature of the niche I work in, I more readily see PTSD and trauma. But really, I suppose the word anxiety would be the biggest of everything. I think if you're struggling with PTSD, you will have anxiety of some form. I do work with teenagers. They're having an awful lot of anxiety. You have something called free-floating anxiety, general anxiety disorder. It really just comes up everywhere. Yeah, so there's probably all sorts of different reasons and foundations for that, but that would be a common thread for nearly everybody.
Sorry, just a quick question on that. So you said obviously there's a rise in teen anxiety, and the obvious sort of thought as any parent is to think, well, okay, it's bloody social media, but obviously that's I guess crude. What would you attribute the causes to, or what's your experience been when treating teens with high anxiety?
I don't think it's far off to say social media, but you're right. I'm not saying that's going to cause it all. What social media has created is there is not a single moment for some teenagers' day where they're not on it. And that means either being clever or funny or interested or replying or sending a picture or being cool or whatever it is that they have to do online. There's not a moment that it stops for them. That's the issue. So, and it doesn't have to therefore be social media. It can be because it's school and then clubs and then home and then homework and sport, which is brilliant, but they're still not. My daughter does sort of netball, hockey and tennis and football, so it's brilliant, but actually she never stops. And so still there has to be a place where they're never bored. I will say that. They don't know how to be bored, so they're anxious if they're bored. They don't know how to cope with boredom, so they're anxious if they're bored.
I've heard other people say that.
Yeah, they're not good at being bored. And there's not a second that they're not doing something from morning till night, and that is not good for the brain or the body.
A good point, and sort of hearing you say that makes me think about my own teenage years, which were, I think, especially indolent. But I think as a generation, we were much better at not being overstimulated, if that makes sense. You literally didn't have access to all of the different distractions that are perhaps available today, and perhaps also there was less time and money available for kids. So it feels like, they are sort of, they're catapulted into an adult world, and they don't have the equipment to deal with it.
They really don't, and we don't teach them, because a lot of, I'm a parent that didn't have the generation of social media, so we didn't get to kind of teach them about that and learn it ourselves, and then help them with what we learn about it. So I didn't have social media growing up. But the other thing I'd say about social media, which is why it's an extension of school and there's no let-up of it, is that every single thing about social media is comparison.
Yes.
So it's always that you're not good enough, really. That's the comparison. And if you bought this product or bought these clothes or did this song or went online or drank this thing, you'll be cooler or better or slimmer or richer or clever or whatever. And they say happier. You won't be, but yes, that's what they say. So the message constantly to every teen, and us, because we're on social media too, but they are more, is that you're not good enough unless you do this, this and this. So they don't get a second of being okay and fine and good enough. Not a second.
I felt that when I was 20 in 1990, and when we went to university about around then, I felt that it was suddenly almost like a new thing that people, it didn't happen to me, but I had lots and lots of friends who experienced some sort of mental health issue. So the two very good friends who had panic attacks, would end up in hospital, or in a pub garden. Someone wanted, they've got a brown paper bag over his face, and I just don't remember that being a thing. And it sounds like such an old, I don't want to sound like an old granddad say, "Oh, we never had it in my day," but it did seem to be starting in about the 90s, and then now, family and friends of the children's generation in the decades since then. I hardly know anyone who hasn't been affected by. I'm talking about teenagers and young adults, actually into their 30s. It seems to be almost epidemic of something. Is there any? I don't know. Is there any research about this? Were people in the 1970s having panic attacks? I don't know.
And actually, weirdly, just wrote this chapter in my book. So I'm writing a book. So I'll come back on and tell you about my book later, another day.
Yes, please.
But writing a book about it, and actually because that's what so many old sweats say in the police, is they go, well, 30 years ago we didn't have all this mental health, but it's like that. So, and I do answer it in two ways. One, actually, we did have mental health problems. We just called it different things. What we visibly saw was the effect of mental health. So what we saw is, and these are rife in military and police, is divorce, alcohol or other dependency problems, anger or outbursts or irrational behaviour problems, risk-taking behaviours, insomnia. What else do we have? Bullying behaviours. What else would we say? Obviously, we had suicide. So we had all the outcomes of mental health, but we didn't attribute a lot of it to mental health, and we didn't talk about it. So if somebody was having panic attacks, it was probably behind closed doors, or masked as something else when they were out, or drinking your way through it, or whatever else it is.
It just didn't have a name, maybe.
It didn't have a name. I mean,
it was taboo, wasn't it?
Oh, go on, sorry.
It was taboo. Yeah. Funny enough, so Martin was being very discreet. Well, I was one of those people that he mentioned, and I remember, and I think the at the time it was the sort of the mental issues that I experienced, the emotional issues, were because I was taking way too many drugs, basically. But there was also something which was much more deep. There was something much deeper which I hadn't dealt with from a couple of things from the past. So they all surfaced in one sort of horrible, messy thing. And I remember at the time, it was a very clear decision to me, which was you either sort of just bury it and just say, I've had 6 months off, but that's okay. Or you without becoming single issue, you acknowledge it and say, oh, yeah, I had a breakdown. And I couldn't face the idea of pretending it hadn't happened. So when people asked, I said, well, yeah, I had this breakdown. And the thing that surprised me, to your point about it being something we didn't discuss, is I didn't realize how many people were going to come to me later or after and say, oh, yeah, me too. Men in particular, actually. So, of course, women mostly were like, oh, God, you poor thing. Are you okay? Fine. How are you doing now? But men who may have sort of said, oh, you're mad, aren't you? And of course, that's our sort of release mechanism. It's like, yeah, I'm mad. Funny. But that's how we dealt with it. But then actually, it was then afterwards when people would say, oh, by the way, tell me how you're behaving when. So I think you're right. Absolutely. I think it's always been there. And thinking about PTSD and shooting deserters in the war, the First World War, right? Like they weren't deserting.
Yeah.
They weren't cowards. They were
Exactly.
yeah,
They were not
yeah,
cowards.
yeah.
Yeah. And even actually talking about that, I was watching Downton Abbey in my, crazy lifestyle that I do, guys, watching Great Date with Downton Abbey. But they obviously that goes through the World War, and they were talking about an ex-soldier who had shell shock, and that's what they had: nightmares and panic attacks and breakdowns and avoidance of situations and people, and and they said it's shell shock. So we just called it different things, or we didn't call it anything. But my other answer to that question is yes. Do I think we have more now? Yes, I do. And I do feel it's crisis level, I guess, really. I say crisis because we just don't have the resources to support it. So crisis in that sense. But yeah, I do think there's more. Because of what we've said, really, that life doesn't allow you to put anything down for a second and breathe. Yeah. So.
Do you know, is it a particularly UK thing? Do you know if other countries, are they doing better in that terms of dealing with that crisis in, I don't know, Norway or whatever?
I don't know about who's doing it better. That's honest. I know because I did a talk for the NYPD in January, so I know their police officers struggle the same. Absolutely, they have a crisis situation of police leaving, as we do, that we can't recruit and fill their spaces. So I know that they're having sort of similar problems across in the States, but I don't know. No, really good question. I'm going to research it after this. Who's doing it better than me? Yeah.
Be nice to know someone's dealing with it.
Yeah, I would. Well, we spent so long burying our head in the sands of not learning about it or talking about it. I think we've got quite a while to catch up on, haven't we? But
yeah,
but we're getting there.
So you're also a qualified wellbeing life coach.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that? Is that quite different?
Yes and no. It's something I bring into nearly every session, but usually because people come with trauma, what we have to do is work on the trauma first, definitely. So we work at that with the form of psychotherapy that I work with. So that's nearly always the first approach. But after that, when somebody is, what phrase would you like, doing better, whatever it is for them that means that this is feeling different and looking different and life is starting to feel different. What to me is really, really important is that you know how to stay well. Because there's no point doing all this if you're then going to go a bit like me with cancer and just going back into work, going back into the same shit show, being blunt. Am I allowed to swear on your podcast? Yeah, that's all right. That's good.
No swearing, please.
That's good. Okay. So just went back to the same shit show and then I was ill again. So my point is we also have to help with how do you stay well. And this isn't any sort of perfect journey at all. Doesn't mean I'll never be ill or anything like that, because I'm not naive enough to say that. But I do think I've got a better shot at it now of staying well mentally and physically because of the wellbeing coaching side. So that is how you bring in ways to listen to yourself, ways to hear when your body's telling you it's going pear-shaped. How do you use different tools and techniques? What works for you? Is it exercise? Is it diet? Is it meditation? Is it mindfulness? Is it all those things? Is it talking therapy? I still have supervision and I would still go for talking therapy if I needed it, or BWRT if I needed it. So wellbeing coaching is maintaining your health as well as coming out of ill health.
Could I ask, you mentioned two things there, BWRT and talking therapy. Could you just tell us a little bit about what they are?
Talking therapies can encompass quite a few different things. Probably the most commonly used would be CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy. And I am trained in trauma-focused CPT, trauma-focused cognitive processing therapy, which is a talking therapy. And I think it has its place. And I would never knock any therapy, by the way, at all, because there's no one size fits all. But in terms of trauma, I believe one of the most efficient ways to deal with trauma is to use a therapy that works with the subconscious part of the brain, which is the amygdala, which is the place that is being traumatized all the time, usually if you have PTSD. And a talking therapy works with the conscious part of the brain, most commonly the hippocampus, and that can be very useful and very important. But in PTSD clients, the hippocampus tends to be completely and utterly overwhelmed. We call it, the therapeutic term is hippocampal failure, so it's failing. And therefore, trying to work with it is hard going sometimes, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
So actually, any therapy that works with the amygdala, the subconscious part of the brain that has been triggered all the time with trauma, is, I believe, the most effective, not trying to rubbish anybody else. So BWRT works with the amygdala, it works with the subconscious part of the brain so that we can help change those neural pathways that have been set up in trauma. So trauma will set up certain pathways to respond, usually in an overreactive way, either very angry, very tearful, very frightened, very emotional, or no emotion at all. So it will actually do the opposite and cut you off and make you numb and cut off from emotion. The amygdala will decide what that is for you through trauma. And until you change that pattern, it's quite difficult to come out of those trauma responses. So BWRT works with that, with the amygdala, but it's not hypnotherapy, because hypnotherapy is another therapy that works with the amygdala. So I'm not knocking that either. It can be absolutely brilliant. But I tried it and I didn't want to be hypnotized. I didn't want to sort of go under or whatever it is that they wanted to do. I didn't want that. And I think a lot of people with trauma struggle with that lack of control if you're being hypnotized, because one of the things they want is to control because they're frightened, really. And so a lot of people struggle with that. But I'm not knocking it. Hypnotherapy can be great. EMDR is the other one that works with the subconscious part of the brain. So another good trauma therapy. I'm not trained in it. And then BWRT is the other one that I know, and work.
That's absolutely fascinating. So really, some things are so awful, you can't rationalise your way out of it with the sort of conscious part of the brain.
Yes, I'm not going to say can't, but very difficult to. Yes, yes, I would say. And then the wellbeing coaching side is almost more working with that conscious part of the brain of how do we put these things in place, like you said, rationalising, contexting, seeing the bigger picture, seeing your end goal, that kind of stuff. So once the hippocampus is back online, we would call it, back online and back working properly, that is when you can work with all those.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is it? What happens in BWRT?
What happens? What happens? It is very difficult to describe if we're not doing a session. But what I do want to say is you don't have to recall your trauma in great detail. I will say that because that's a worry often for people with trauma therapy. So you do not. If people want to, they will always have that space with me, because I think that's the talking side. That can be really, really important to be able to come somewhere safe and talk about it. But they don't have to, and that's a really important part. And what we look at is, where is the amygdala being triggered and frightened or responding in a way that you don't wish to? And then we talk about how you'd like to respond instead and be responding instead. Okay. And then we have a bit, so we have to prep, if you like, a session first, and we prep that through first. And then we have a protocol that we run. I'll give you a little, like it's scripted. So we have like a script to run. And because that is very specifically worded for the amygdala to listen and take note of.
So you're reading that script you just showed us, or the patient?
I am. Yeah. It's the patient is, or the client is involved in the session, but we would run it. We would run the session. But the client has all the say-so of what we're working on, what they would like to feel instead. We prep that very much with the client's direction and control.
And so what is the script what sort of thing? Is it's tailored to that person's situation or their experience, and you're trying to trigger it, or?
We are purposely trying to trigger it, that's honest. But I do want to stress to anybody listening and might be almost worried about doing it, is that we don't seek to re-traumatize people. So we want to trigger the amygdala, but we do move the amygdala very, very quickly in the therapy onto what we've chosen in terms of how we want to respond instead. And we do move it very quickly. So you are not in some sort of suspended state of abreaction or trauma. We're talking 2 or 3 seconds before it's moved on, because that is something that people worry about, understandably, through trauma therapy.
It must be amazing. You must be tremendously satisfying and rewarding, your job.
Yeah, it is, I guess, would be just some of that answer. Yeah, very rewarding. Yeah, very lovely. And I just guess kind of what I wanted in the police, because, again, that kind of making a difference, being cliched, but having that time, the resources, the skill set, hopefully, to really be making that difference is amazing. Yeah, it's a lovely job.
And I presume every day is just people being extremely grateful. As opposed to some days, presumably in the police, all you get is abuse and no thanks at all, right?
Yeah, people tend to be much nicer to me. Yeah, I'll give you that.
It is a marvellous thing, isn't it? I think everyone should have therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's my job, but I do. I think we should have it, like you go to the gym and everything. Yeah.
Also physical therapy.
Honestly, I think we should.
Well, we did an episode with a massage therapist and we were talking about this, but Andrew said exactly that. We should, it should be on the NHS. You should have a, massage as well as you should have counselling and all types of mental health therapy, but you should also have.
Because our life, I guess what you were talking about, Andy, our life now really isn't geared to being well. That's really the honest answer. It just isn't.
I agree.
The tech isn't, I don't know, the online stuff isn't, our diet isn't, it's not, none of it's geared to being well. So actually we have to spend a fair amount of time being well.
Well, it's funny when you go to, and is it Twycross Zoo, where they've got the incredibly unhappy gorilla? And you think about this and you think, well, look, here we are, a very close relative of ours who is, leading a sedentary life where all the food is provided and they just sit there all day. And he's massively depressed. He sits there underneath a tarpaulin. It's the saddest thing. No, he does. Honestly, it's the saddest thing you've ever seen. And you think, well, that's what we are. We're not that far away. We don't do any of the things that we've evolved to do, right? So we eat shit.
Yeah.
Right. We sit down all day. We are massively overwhelmed in terms of the information we're being asked to process. We don't get the chance to process that in a balanced way, particularly through social media. So no wonder everyone's sick.
I agree. And therefore you have to spend time sort of balancing that equilibrium the whole time, because our lives there's a great little paragraph in Matt Haig's book about depression, and he says our brains just haven't evolved enough for, and he says strip lighting in Tesco at 2 a.m. and and Taylor Swift on sort of replay on you think and 100 emails at midnight, and we're just not, our brains just are not geared for that to be healthy. So you've got to put the stuff in to try and help it be healthy all the time.
Do less. That's my mantra. Do much less.
Do much less. Or if you're going to do loads of stuff, then make sure you do love it. Because I will say that I'm really busy, but I do love it. So, it's cool. But if I don't love it, I won't do it. Yeah.
Hannah, it's been an absolute pleasure and fascinating. So really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Really lovely talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to meet you.
And you.